Welcome to Think Tank, the podcast. I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from East Main Media Studio with my colleague Nicole Swennerton, who is the senior producer of Think Tank, the broadcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great. Before you tell people how to find us, we're going to be introducing Margaret Hoover, who is in fact the host of Firing Line on PBS, the Firing Line with Margaret Hoover. As a female journalist yourself, you see someone like Margaret Hoover, who has, by the way, I'll make it clear, she's a classic, I don't know what that means. She's a conservative, but an intellectual. When you see someone like her on the air, inspiring to you at all?
I would say it's inspiring in some ways. I think that there are a lot of female role models who are in the media today. She's a great example of that. I think she does a nice job of interviewing important people.
Hold on a second. I'm curious about this. Are you drawn more toward people, women or men in the media, who skew more progressive?
Am I allowed to say that? Yes.
No, you're allowed. It's Think Tank, the podcast. We're setting up the show. But the whole idea of Margaret Hoover is she brings on different people, different points of view. You are more inspired by those who are more like you in terms of your thinking?
Yes, definitely. And I think that seeing her as a female in the Republican Party, sometimes it's a little hard to grapple with that.
Whoa, why?
I don't
Do you think it's harder?
I think it's certainly harder, and I've heard women say that it's harder to be...
She says it's harder.
Yeah, it's hard to be a woman in the Republican Party right now under the leadership of President Trump. So I think looking at her and her beliefs, I think it's interesting to hear her point of view.
Let's just say this. I respect Nicole's point of view, but I've interviewed more and more women in the Republican Party, like Assemblywoman Holly Schapese, who was, in fact, you produced that show.
I did.
Okay, looking at Republicans in the party. And is it the party of Trump that happens to be called the Republican Party, or is it a Republican Party with room for others? And in fact, as we do this program, there was just a vote in the United States House of Representatives as to whether the president would have been publicly not censored, but criticized for his recent tweets as we do this program around about 4 Democratic members of Congress, women who happen to be women of color, that many, and I'll include myself, saw it as stone cold racist. Many Republicans refused to say it was. I bet if we asked Margaret Hoover, she'd say no doubt.
Right.
Then the question is, how can you be a part of the Republican Party? That's exactly what this Think Tank, the podcast, is about. It's about Margaret Hoover talking about how she remains a Republican, talking about how she has come into the PBS family to interview people in a thoughtful, respectful, civil way on ideas, on policy, not on name-calling.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that she does make an interesting point, which we'll hear in the upcoming interview, about how she called herself a Republican in exile. And I think we're seeing that a lot now is people who still want to hold on to the conservative beliefs and the classic Republican values, but they do have a hard time with the leader of the party. So hearing her perspective on that is probably something a lot of people can relate with right now.
Well, I'm a fan of Margaret's, whether I agree with her or not. By the way, her husband, John Avalon, is a commentator over at CNN. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with Margaret in the past at another network, and I always found her to be thoughtful, intellectual, even though I didn't agree with her on very many issues. But it was an absolute thrill to talk to her in studio. This is Margaret Hoover on Think Tank, the podcast. I'm Steve Adubato. That's Nicole. Let's check it out.
For 33 years, across more than 1,500 episodes, Firing Line provided a platform for an exchange of opinion. Welcome to Firing Line, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Caitlyn Jenner, Governor John Kasich, Madame Christine Lagarde, Speaker Paul Ryan. Our mission is to renew the Firing Line tradition for a new generation and engage new voices and viewers alike in a debate about the America we want to create in the 21st century.
That's Firing Line. We have the host right here. She is, in fact, Margaret Hoover, host of Firing Line with Margaret Hoover on PBS. Hey.
Hi.
Welcome to the PBS family.
Thank you so much.
Is this not the greatest broadcast network around?
It is a total, really, truly an honor. I mean, all of us grew up with PBS, especially, beginning, this is the most brilliant marketing strategy ever. Get them while they're young. Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers.
But
right?
you got to keep them with compelling programming.
Yes, you do. And so that's what you do. That's what I'm trying to do. And it's really, actually, it's like the honor of a lifetime to be able to be part of this.
Well, for those of us who are old enough to remember William F. Buckley, 66 to 99, he did Firing Line. He had his own unique style, fair to say?
Totally fair to say. Do you know he was the longest running television host in television history, more than Johnny Carson. And now you're at 30 years?
You were just about at 30 years.
So, you know, you could beat him.
Do I just better than Buckley?
You dress. I don't think he thought he his dress was the distinguishing
I know I'm
feature
not
of
as
his
smart as
performance.
How smart was William F. Buckley?
William Buckley was incredibly
Like
bright.
scary smart.
He was smart, but the thing that he was best at was his locution. He would use multisyllabic words over and over and over again that forced everybody to sit and watch his show before you could watch with multiple screens with a dictionary in your lap and a thesaurus. So you could try to figure out what he was saying. I mean, that was the signature riff about Buckley, is his choice in words and his mastery of the English language, both with the pen and with his tongue.
And a conservative intellectual who made people think, whether they agreed with him or not. And you take on the mantle of this show with your own brand, your own style, your own approach. You identify as a quote-unquote conservative. You're clearly an intellectual. But it's different times. Very different. So let's put this right out there. The Donald Trump brand of quote-unquote conservatism, Republican conservatism, you're shaking your head as I speak, and the Margaret Hoover brand, not that you were here on public broadcasting to express your point of view, but you have been a commentator before, and we do know your track record. Different?
100% different. I mean, they're even different than William F. Buckley's brand of conservatism.
Absolutely.
William F. Buckley Jr. really was one of the, I would say he was the most prominent public intellectual of the modern American conservative movement, certainly as a television personality because of Firing Line.
That's right.
And the conservative movement, when it started, and it's in the 1950s, around the formation of National Review, the magazine that he founded,
That's right.
embodied a series of ideas. But it was basically this group of people that had totally different ideas that formed together in a coalition, and there were three parts. Reagan sort of loosely referred to them as three pillars of the or three legs of the stool. But the early modern American conservative movement in the 50s and 60s was economic libertarians, anti-communists, and traditionalists, but they didn't, I mean, it was even before Roe v. Wade. These were people who thought that organized society was becoming too secular, and they thought that there was a place for religion, whatever religion it was, to have a place in the public square, and that's why the prayer in school fights sort of became part of the public
Buckley happened to
debate
be
of the
Catholic.
Conservative. He was very Catholic. He was
very
like an Orthodox Catholic.
An Orthodox Catholic.
He was quite observant. He really was. I mean, most Catholics these days are pro-life, pro-choice rather, not pro-life.
That's right.
Buckley was a really traditional Catholic. That is incredibly different than the current conservative movement that Donald Trump has really co-opted.
Sorry for interrupting, Margaret. Is Donald Trump the Republican/conservative party thing today? Is he it?
I mean, the conservative movement has become something very different than it was under Buckley. With Buckley, it was an intellectual movement, and then, under Reagan and then later Bush in the 90s and 2000s, it has become something broader than just an intellectual movement, right? There's a grassroots movement that is very big. It's sort of grassroots and the intellectual sphere. What's happened now is there is a conservative architecture in Washington, D.C. that Paul Ryan not so endearingly calls the conservative industrial complex.
What does that mean?
And it means that there have been entities that have now been in place for decades that sort of support quote-unquote conservative causes, whoever the president is. And I think, in my view, and I think Buckley would argue this too, that they've become untethered from some of those original ideas that define the modern American conservative movement that Buckley espoused. So you don't see conservatives in Washington, D.C. anymore arguing for debt and deficits and fiscal responsibility. Those two ideas have become totally delinked. So I think there's a really good argument that the conservative movement today that Donald Trump, pretends to put his arms around, I think pretends to put his arms around, I'm going to anger some people for saying that, is very disconnected.
How did he co-opt it?
The modern conservative
How did Donald Trump, with his past...
Republican Party.
Well, hold on one second, Margaret. Respectfully, with his track record of things that he had said over the years, including that Hillary Clinton got a royal deal, she would have been a good candidate at the time. Bill Clinton was unfairly persecuted, prosecuted, impeached. He didn't think it was a particularly serious offense. And the fact that he funded Democrats all those years who were running for office, and then he's the leader of the Republican Party / he's a conservative. Listen, that's not my opinion. Those are facts. And I'm curious as to, from your view, and by the way, you call yourself an exiled, if you will?
I'm a Republican in exile.
Okay. How did he, and I don't even know if the word is co-opt.
He owns it now. I mean, he owns it.
He owns it.
He's
not even renting it. He owns it.
Here's what happened, though. I mean, and this is something that beware the Democrats coming in 2020 when you have 20 people on the stage or more fighting for that nomination. What happened in the Republican Party is Donald Trump never won a plurality. He never won a majority of votes.
Sure.
He never won a majority of the votes. But the majority of Republican primary voters split their votes between everybody else. And so the ideas that the conservative movement has always espoused, all the other candidates were fighting over, and he occupied this different lane. And then over time, it ended up getting...
What's that lane? Describe that lane.
I think it's economic populism. I think it's people who are disaffected with the current status. I think there was a real group of Republicans and Republican primary voters who were quite concerned as it whittled down to Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush. They're concerned about another Bush. They're concerned about Ted Cruz. Everybody had a strong opinion. And by the way, it was a circular firing squad on the conservative side. Everybody shot everybody else thinking Donald Trump wasn't a serious candidate.
But here's the part that was always confusing to me, is Ronald Reagan was able to attract the disaffected, disproportionately white working class voters in key states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, et cetera, without calling people names, without demonizing others, without saying the most horrific, disrespectful, and disgusting things about women and laughing about it. So I'm confused as to how much of it was, I love that Donald Trump says what he thinks versus ideologically he represents me. Or am I making too much of this?
Sometimes I think you and I want to think that there's a lot more about the ideas and the policies behind a candidate. And in the case of Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, there was, amongst the Republican primary base, amongst a lot of people, just a lot of dislike for Hillary Clinton, and a lot of dislike for Washington, and a lot of dislike for the establishment. And for a lot of people, they were throwing their lot into, well, how bad can he do? Like, let's mix it up and try
Because, quote, I don't
different.
like her.
I don't like her. That was a lot of it, certainly. But then there was also a lot of like, if Donald Trump is good at anything, he is incredibly good at marketing, right? Drain the swamp, throw the crooks out. Let's mix it up. And I think people took a calculated risk, thinking, well, maybe he can do something different because these other people have all been in power for a really long time, and look at where we are. And there's a lot of hurt.
And by the way, we should make it clear that we are taping at the end of 2018. We do not know exactly what's going to happen as it relates to different investigations going on right now, reports that may be coming out. If you're predicting, does Donald Trump serve out this full term?
I think he does. I think he should, as long as there's not, some sort of legal process, right? Donald Trump shouldn't be removed through any other process than a totally legal and constitutional process. And I think the way we change presidents in this country is by voting for another president or voting somebody out or in again. That's the best way to do it.
Do you see a Republican running against? I'm sorry, make your point. I apologize for interrupting.
I mean, there's a real question about whether Donald Trump will want to run again, right? Donald Trump, of course, thinks he's going to run again. And this is a theory that is being banted about, maybe by people who, on the Republican side, hope that somebody else can come in and save the party or take it back to its original roots or in a better course or direction. But there is this real question about whether Donald Trump is going to be able to weather the storm of a Democratic Congress that has him under investigation, members of his family being called up to testify before Democratic intelligence committees, being able to withstand 20 candidates single-handedly putting their fire on him unilaterally, and the criticism over and over and over again may just be a very different level of fire than he's willing to endure for another 2 years or another 4 years.
Before I let you out of here, you're head of a nonprofit that's making a difference in the lives of a lot of people who have suffered for too long for no good reason. Describe it.
Thanks. It's American Unity Fund, and we're an advocacy organization. And what we do is we work with Republican and conservative legislators across the country to help secure LGBT equality and freedom. And now that seems like it's a cause for a dinner party joke, right? You're working with Republicans to help secure LGBT equality. I worked on marriage equality here in New York and lobbied the legislators up in Albany. New York was a really important state in the LGBT equality movement because it was the first state that passed marriage through a legislature with a Republican Senate. And it was Republican leadership that allowed that bill to come to a vote, and it was 4 very courageous Republican legislators who voted for marriage equality. And that model in New York, we then were able to export to other states around the country that were states that needed to pass it with Republican support. And so that's where we started. But the truth is, the places where LGBT freedoms are being eroded because of the marriage decision are happening mostly in red states across the country. And so you actually have to build strong alliances of Republicans across the country in order to help secure those freedoms.
Important
And that's
work.
what we do.
So if people want to see, by the way, Firing Line is shot right here.
Right here?
In the studio at the Tisch WNET studio, seen across the nation on public broadcasting, but in our market, WNET and JTV New Jersey, out on the island. Thank you. And you continue to add a great deal to the public broadcasting family.
Thank you so much for having me. I really
All the
appreciate
best.
it. Love your
You got
show.
it. Thank you very much.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by Atlantic Health System, New Jersey Sharing Network, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Keystone Mountain Lakes Regional Council of Carpenters, New Jersey Resources, and by Wells Fargo. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.